Making your tree able to react to simulated wind correctly is thankfully really easy inside SpeedTree. Traditional methods either allow you to only animate a tree through creating bones and basically rigging the whole asset, while together animating the movement to something that looks like wind, or altogether create a simulation which then moves the bones accordingly. Another common method, especially when working in a game engine or game environment, is breaking down larger portions of a tree down to clusters, as we have learned before, and then use a complex shader setup which basically allows the manipulation of the vertex position, displacing the cluster in the process and so animating it. The indie version of SpeedTree also allows you to do exactly that inside the software itself, so you can directly export your trees to the engine you're working in and have set up the shader and displacement already. However, since we are aiming to import this tree in Blender, we need to use the Cinema Modeler version and also take a slightly different approach, which also allows us to introduce a lot more detail in the movement. The first thing we want to do is head up here to the wind button and switch into the wind properties. This will open some new settings and parameters here on the left. This looks like quite a lot at first, and depending on how much control you want to have, also can be really a lot to consider. But since SpeedTree is a wonderful piece of software, we can just use the wind wizard here, which will help us setting this tree up, so we only have to adjust a little bit after. In the first drop-down menu, you're able to choose what kind of preset your tree resembles the most. In this scenario, we want to pick Stately Shade Tree, as it comes pretty close. In the next two menus, you most likely don't want to change anything unless you have some experience with the wind properties and already adjusted some settings on the left in the process. I will however stick with the default settings and also don't change anything in the conditions, as this is where you can choose from weather presets. Following up, you will also need to determine which types of leaves you're aiming to create on your tree. This is relevant as it already sets up how strong they can bend in the process, making them act pretty realistic without further tweaking. I will again leave this on default as our leaves are just that. The drop-down menus are also not going to be touched, as they already are set correctly. Depending on what plant you might build, you need to adjust this here. Some generators, besides the leaves, would also appear here and needed to be specified. So, if we would add some decorations or fruits to the tree, we would need to set this here, as they should not be treated like leaves. If everything is set correctly, just hit OK. Now you can enable the wind already by again clicking up here and now choose Enable. If you have a look at the right side here, you can find the fan symbol moving and also a gizmo to tweak from where the wind is applied to the tree. With the sliders, you can adjust how much strength of the wind is applied and how strong and frequent gusting happens. Switching back to the left side, we can see that our node tree slightly changed its appearance and some numbers are present now. These numbers are indices that show how far in the levels that you can find in the parameters here, the generator you are looking at has been placed. This allows you to take a lot of finer control to adjust how your tree actually behaves. For example, adjusting the curves inside the first level for bend and turbulence will introduce a lot of movement on the branches, making it look like the tree is hit by a tornado. At the same time, I could just disable this level, making the branches not move at all. A few scrolls further down, you can also find separate settings for instant leaves as well as fronts. What those are will be explained further in the coming chapters. Play with these values until you are satisfied with the result. If you now switch over to File and Export Mesh, you first need to specify where the tree should be saved to and in which format. You can choose between several options and, in some cases, choosing Alembic will make things a lot easier. I prefer exporting in the FBX format and thus hit save. Now a new window appears that lets you set some export settings. I will only touch some settings here as you do not need to worry about most of these when exporting to Blender and not working in a real-time engine. First off, down at the bottom, you can find the animation panel, which can be enabled by checking in Wind. What this does is create a keyframed animation which can directly be read by Blender. All you need to do is to specify the strength of the wind, if gusting should be enabled, the frame rate to play the animation, and the duration. One thing to note here is that the animation does not loop. SpeedTree generates a dynamic animation that will be stored inside the animation data of the FBX. So if your tree will be seen for a longer time in your latest scene or animation, make sure to give it enough keyframes here. The last thing you want to check is the texture settings. Make sure to choose the format of your liking and also adjust the maximum size, depending on what resolution you need. You might also want to skip the texture save if you do not have made any changes in the process. We did, however, tweak a few textures, so I will not skip it here. If everything is set correctly, hit OK. This might take some while now if you choose to export the textures as well, as they need to be compiled first.